It's a great pleasure to be here at the Edinburgh Science Festival and to introduce three brilliant and diverse engineers I've interviewed for the Inventive Podcast. I'm Trevor Cox, host and co-creator of Inventive. Now, I come from acoustical engineering, but my engineers are much more diverse than that. Aerospace, electrical, chemical, structural, biomaterials, even disaster risk engineering, a new one on me. But one thing that unites them all is their enthusiasm for making the world a better place for all of us. We have some regular questions on Inventive. I ask engineers what they think the most audacious act of engineering is, what they would do if they could change one thing about engineering, and this one.
So if I was to ask you if I could give you a superpower, what would it be and why?
I've always wanted to be able to read faster. I know it's not a cool superpower, if I'm honest, but just being able to digest information much more quickly. That to me is kind of a realistic sounding superpower, because I could have said invisibility, but that may not be achievable in my lifetime. So I'll stick with being able to ingest information faster.
Really, I think the best superpower I could have would be an infallible memory. And that's just because engineering is an incredibly technical discipline, so you need to know a lot. Which is one of the appeals, because you're always learning and you're always challenging your levels of knowledge. But actually a really important thing that I think I'm not very good at is remembering and understanding the various connections between all of the actors in the situation that you're in. So how these different teams interrelate, how the different ministries interrelate, what their relationships are with each other and with our team, and I think the superpower that would help the most is being able to remember every little detail, so that you can use that to help you navigate as best you can.
Honestly, being an engineer is my superpower, because I get to do whatever I want. I can make a plane. I've built a car and raced it. I've built a machine that can detect cancer. Right now I'm transforming people's lives for a living. It's incredible, and I hope other people see that, and it can be your superpower too.
The three inventive engineers today are Askra Halonga, who's creating a network of water purification stations around Africa using a filtration system he invented. Sian Cleaver, who's working on the spacecraft that will take the first woman to the moon. She hopes to be on that mission. But first up, it's Sophie Robinson. She's an aerospace engineer working to design the first electrical vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. This is an extract from her Inventive Podcast episode, where not only will you hear me interviewing Sophie, you'll also hear a short extract from a story written by author Tony White. You see, the basic premise of Inventive is to mix engineering, fact and fiction. For each show we interview our engineer and then commission writers to create a story inspired by the conversation. Why? Because we're trying to explore new ways of telling stories about engineering, so we can inspire more people to want to be engineers. The stories range from science fiction to espionage. So here's Sophie.
Okay, hello. My name is Sophie Robinson, and I am the Senior Flight Dynamics Engineer at Vertical Aerospace, who are a company based in Bristol, who are building an electrical vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, commonly referred to as an air taxi.
Describe to me what your prototype aircraft looks like then.
So if you can imagine a normal aircraft with the wings sticking out the side of the fuselage, that's pretty much what ours looks like too. With one difference is that we've got 8 rotors which are mounted on the wings. So we can use the rotors to lift the aircraft vertically into the air, which is not something that you can do obviously with a fixed wing aircraft. But then when we want to start moving forward at higher speed, the rotors on the leading edge, so the front of the wing, they're able to tilt from their pointing upwards position. They're able to tilt through 90 degrees into the forward facing position. And then we can cruise like a normal fixed wing aircraft. It's able to take 4 passengers and their luggage, and the pilot sat in the front. So you can kind of imagine how big it is from that. and it's got an overall wingspan of about 15 meters.
So, I mean, I've seen you described as an aerospace engineer. I mean, if you had to describe that to sort of friends and family outside the field, how would you describe what you do?
I've done a lot of different things in various different bits of the kind of aerospace engineering world, but at the moment, I am responsible for the delivery of the pilot in the loop simulation capability. So the simulator that we will use to train our pilots and investigate kind of how the aircraft that we've designed will fly. So that's part of my job. I'm also involved in the delivery of the control laws for the aircraft. So kind of the brain of the aircraft. So how the pilot's commands are translated from the sticks into the actual aircraft motion, that kind of aspect. And also kind of the performance calculations, so how the aircraft performs, basically. So lots of different things.
And I mean, why do we need to have these electrical vehicles in the air?
One of the things, actually, one of the missions that we've been flying in our simulator in the office is, for example, taking off from London City Airport and taxiing in the air down the River Thames and landing at the heliport in Battersea. So in our aircraft, that journey will take you 7 minutes. In the tube, it's a lot longer than 7 minutes. And in a taxi on the road, it's probably even longer. On a bus, even longer. So it's really intended to be used for those kind of medium-term journeys. And you could also use it sort of intercity. So, for example, if you were flying from Heathrow to Brighton, or you were flying from Heathrow to Bristol, you could use it for that. Sort of medium-range journeys. And the idea behind it is purely to ease congestion on the roads. So, and also to reduce carbon emissions, because it's zero emissions at the point of use.
One thing that strikes me about these kind of technologies is we have terribly clogged up roads. So we've kind of filled the ground space up in cities and concreted them over. And so the idea is obviously get in the sky, you can avoid this congestion. But, I suppose the question is, what are the problems with going up into the air with lots of people travelling?
Well, I think there are three main kind of challenges with integrating this type of aircraft into the airspace. So whilst you might look up and the sky seems to be pretty empty, actually, in terms of air traffic control, it's insanely busy up there. So there isn't much space for them already. So how we integrate this type of aircraft into our current air traffic setup is going to be a really interesting question. Another of the primary concerns, obviously, of people who live in the areas that these kind of aircraft would be operating, because another potential use for them would be to hop from the suburbs into the inner city. If you live in the suburbs, you live there because you quite like it, because it's nice and quiet. And what you don't want is some enormous electrical air taxi vehicle coming and landing on, say, the top of the apartment building where you live and disturbing your nice, restful peace of a weekend or of an evening. So we're actively designing this aircraft to be incredibly quiet. So, the passenger experience and also the experience of the people that are going to have to accept this type of vehicle operating in the areas where they live is very high on our mind. The third thing about gaining acceptance from the public is that this has to be something which everybody can afford to use. So the goal is that a trip in one of our electric aircraft would cost you about the same as it would cost you to take an Uber. It would be completely wrong to say that these kind of aircraft are not going to cause any changes or disruption to people's lives, because having these things in the sky is going to be different to how things are now. But if it's something that is relatively quiet, and also it's something that you can afford to use. You're kind of more invested in it, so people will hopefully be more accepting.
That's one of the interesting things about engineering, and I know it well from acoustics, is that the engineering solution isn't all just about solving the maths, it's the social side as well. And you mentioned there, yeah, if your neighbour keeps using these vehicles but you never want to use them, you're much more likely to be annoyed by them, whether that's the noise or some other aspect.
Exactly. And almost, that's the key piece that we really have to solve, because all of the technologies to make this type of vehicle happen exist. Like, we're not conjuring things out of thin air that don't exist at the moment. It's all about bringing those technologies together into a package to make it happen. But then once it's there, if nobody wants to use it, then what's the point? So we really have to make sure that these are going to be accepted by people, and they are socially acceptable as well. And also, just from a personal point of view, I don't want to work on creating something that everybody hates. That's not a good thing for your career, is it?
So, I mean, interesting enough, you have a tattoo which says "Nothing great is easy." Can you tell me where that comes from?
So, "Nothing great is easy" is a quote from Captain Webb, who was the first person to swim the English Channel. And I swam the Channel in 2012. I'm even wearing my mermaid necklace today, just because I am a mermaid when I'm not an engineer. And I think nothing great is easy as a kind of motivating sort of line rings true in a lot of areas of life, and certainly in what we're trying to achieve. When we achieve it, and I say when because we absolutely will, when we get to the point of doing the first flight of the aircraft that we're developing, it will be a great achievement, and it won't have been easy, but we will get there. And you have to remember that as we're going through this incredibly difficult journey and breaking all this new ground, it's going to be worth it in the end, because you're going to get there, and it will be something that in my career I might never get to do again. Be involved in the first flight of a completely novel aircraft type. That opportunity doesn't come along every day. So yeah, it's kind of just something that I use to motivate myself in the day-to-day when things get a little bit difficult and we get a bit bogged down.
That's fascinating. So in Inventive, what we'd like to do is work with both fact and fiction. So we've got a novelist, Tony White, who's going to write something about your engineering and your story. Now, he's been described as a serious, engaging voice of the modern city. And of course, the work you're doing is so much about how we might move around the modern city.
Peter looked around and took off his backpack. Come on, let's get the tents up. I want to swim. Suzanne and Fee were swimming tomorrow, buddying today. So, while the others were getting ready and putting up the tents they used for base camp, somewhere to get warm and to keep clothes and kit dry, Fee thought she might as well pick up where they'd left off. Where have we got to? Go on, ask me that question again. What, about Force 4? Said Suzanne. OK. Why did you leave your last job? Good question, thought Fee. Dad shut the door behind him. That looks good. What are you building? He was standing in the doorway, holding placemats, knives and forks, ketchup. Fee's Lego was spread out over the dining table. Homework done. Her school bag still open where she'd left it on the dark blue leather sofa. What do you think it is? Said Fee. But then she realised it probably didn't look like what it was supposed to be, so she told him. It's a space shuttle petrol station. She'd cannibalised various bits of Star Wars Lego and some other stuff, and somehow integrated Meccano to create a sort of superstructure that it all loosely clicked around and into. In orbit, Yeah. What are those Meccano pieces, Fee? Solar panels? She nodded. Is it crude? Yeah, she said, pointing at 4 little Lego figures. Her die-cast Corgi space shuttle slotted into a kind of holding pen, where a small piece of Lego kept it in place, even when she held it upside down. I like it, he said. You're a clever girl. If you work hard, you can do anything you want. Remember that. She had remembered it, and said it herself many times. But actually, wasn't it more the point that you couldn't always do what you wanted? Or that not everyone could, anyway? Was that why 5 years earlier she'd been reluctant at first to move on, to admit that she was in the wrong job for her? Why she'd come up here to Llyn Idwal on her own, to think things through? Fee certainly hadn't come from a privileged background. Having gone to secondary school in what she now realised was quite a deprived area, she knew plenty of people from school who had jobs, but they didn't necessarily have careers. And even if you'd had potential, for most of them, there'd been no clear route to reaching it, no examples to follow. There'd been loads of arguments when it came to choosing GCSEs. Her mum had wanted Fee to do history and geography, but she'd wanted to do IT, art, and graphic products instead. It had taken her Auntie Jane stepping in to support her. There's no point, Jane had said to her mother, trying to force Fiona to do what you want her to do. Her mum had said, but art GCSE won't get her a job. And you think geography will? Fee had said. That doesn't even make sense. You're going to have to try harder than that, Mum. You're not going to win this argument if it doesn't make sense. She'd been right. And ultimately, all the university places she'd applied for were for different flavours of engineering. Then, after completing her PhD, she'd been thrilled with the job offer at Force 4. She'd felt lucky. A woman from her background doing this. But as time went on, she'd felt more conflicted about working for a military contractor. Fee thought again about that lonely walk up here 5 years earlier, the short but restorative swim, and the decision that had been made by the time she got out of the water, to leave Force 4. That was also the moment that the meaning of her tattoo had literally changed. Not the words themselves. It still said, "Nothing great is easy." And when she was swimming the channel, those words of Captain Matthew Webb's had really helped. That's why she'd got the tattoo. She thought it was about perseverance, gritting your teeth and getting through it. But maybe that was just what she needed to hear at the time. It had kept her going in the English Channel, and at Force 4 too, for a few years. But after that swim, in Llyn Idwal, in the snow, dressed and re-warming in her bivvy, with a flask of chocolate and some cake, it had suddenly clicked. And she'd realised that that wasn't really what it meant at all. It wasn't about blindly soldiering on regardless. It was about doing the right thing.
I guess if I think about climate change, so you're using electrical vehicles here, so as long as we can make clean electricity, then this is potentially carbon neutral, except for possibly the manufacture of it. At least it's better than conventional aircraft. But I guess another way of tackling climate change would be to go, let's not fill up the skies with these taxes. Let's just travel less. So do you think as engineers we need to be thinking about, do we need to make the next invention, or do we actually have to think about changing society so we don't need to make the invention, if that makes sense?
That's a very good question. So I think, from a personal point of view, I think it has to be a mixture of the two, doesn't it? Because the world is a big and interesting place, and I'm a big traveler myself. Like, I'm on a plane off somewhere as soon as I can get the opportunity, every single time. And I don't think on a purely selfish level, I don't want to stop doing that. So if we can reduce emissions in other areas, like unnecessary areas, that can only be a good thing. And hopefully this kind of vehicle can contribute towards that.
I guess someone could accuse me of making a rather Luddite kind of argument here, and that humans make progress, and we can't stop inventing things, and we shouldn't stop inventing things.
Absolutely. And why did I become an engineer in the first place? And it was because I wanted to be involved in projects that are like this. It's something completely new, completely innovative. And that's human nature, isn't it? We always want to find what is the next step, what's the next new thing, how can we put together the different technologies that we develop, because eVTOLs really it's an area where a lot of technology from different areas is starting to come together in previously unused ways. But yeah, I agree with you. We can't stop innovation. It's something that humans naturally want to do, I think.
Yeah, I mean, do you feel like you're like a modern day Wright brothers then, breaking new ground?
I would have to maintain some humility, and I don't think I could possibly compare myself to the Wright brothers. That's but no, we are certainly pushing into unknown areas in the same way that they did, and we're doing it. The track that the Wright brothers took to developing their aircraft, so they would build one and then they would build the next one, and it would use the things that they'd learned on the previous one to improve it and make it better. That's the same process that we're going through in our company. So it's similar in some ways, but for the sake of remaining humble, I'm not going to directly compare myself to the Wright brothers.
The Wright brothers changed the world forever, and that's what our next contributor wants to do. We interviewed Haskara Halonga down the line from Tanzania. He's taken the skills he's learned overseas back to his home country to tackle the problems of contaminated drinking water.
I'm Haskara Halonga, a professor at the Nelson Mandela African Institution of Science and Technology in Tanzania, the home of Mount Kilimanjaro, Serengeti, and Zanzibar. I'm so proud of my country, I'm proud of myself, I'm proud of my people.
So what got you into trying to get cleaner water for the people of Tanzania and Africa?
So here we are faced with the typical challenges that people normally see on CNN. So for me, it was not a movie, it was a real life in which we did not know what to eat tomorrow. My family was one of the poorest family. My father did not go to school, even class 1. My mother did not go to school. We were 9 in the family. 2 already passed away, 3 actually. So for those who are remaining, I am the last born. And we were really facing the real challenges from all aspects of life. Forget about something like electricity. No, I was using the kerosene burners. And then the food was challenging that much. And the water, we did not have clean water. And don't talk about safe. No, at least clean, just whitish water. No. And we can see sometimes worms floating in water. And in my pool, I could see worms. Those were the challenges. There was time when I was struggling with diseases that I don't know what it was. So today I am really asking myself, how was it possible to live under that circumstance? So why I have passion today to give back to these people. I don't want to see them again suffering from those old challenges. Where there are solutions. Those are not like magical issues, like all those diseases that I was suffering from. Today I can just boil down into waterborne diseases. Water purification could help. Just a simple thing like this. Then when I went for my PhD in South Korea, PhD in chemical engineering, and particularly in the field of nanotechnology, I got a lot of exposure and potentials of engineering to solve those problems that I saw in my childhood. And so when I returned to Tanzania, that was in 2012, I was asking myself a question then. What does my PhD mean to my people? We need a solution. So I looked at the market of, for example, water filters. But they are not, these filters are not tuned, are not customized to solve the local challenges in my community. And lo and behold, I said this is an opportunity for me now to change this problem now into a solution, to provide a solution for this challenge. And that is how I came with this invention of nanofilter. So it is an integrated filtration system that is customized to target water contamination challenges in various communities. You can find in a place like along the Rift Valley, there is just too much fluoride, which is affecting bones and teeth and it's causing bone fluorosis. This is terrible here in Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia, and so on. So I said, okay, this is culprit number one. Let me solve this problem. If you go to Lake Victoria, for example, along the mining area, along Lake Victoria, there are too much heavy metals and so on, so on. So I said, let me target these contaminants, bacteria, heavy metals, physical contaminants, turbidity, and so on.
And you're very passionate, aren't you, about it needs local engineers and local people to solve these problems, and it doesn't work when you bring in people from outside necessarily.
Exactly, that's my point. That is how I started, because I developed my own local innovation and I involved my people, local people, to develop these. They develop material, they develop the parts, and if something is broken, we replace by ourselves. So what I'm saying, this is a local innovation with local people, and of course I have other international partners, and I can't drop them because it's important in this equation.
And it must, I mean, does it change attitudes within the villages and
with
local people?
We develop a model in which we put a filter in a kiosk where a local entrepreneur sits in a kiosk and they purify water and sell to their community. So it's a win-win. They provide clean and safe water to the community, but they are, at the same time, that's an income generation for them. They get income from this business. So there is a lot of win-win. We are creating jobs while we are solving the inherent challenges in our communities.
And one thing that struck me earlier on is you talked about you had a PhD and then you thought, what could this do for my people?
That's it. So when I was in South Korea after finishing my PhD, what my friends were actually telling me that, why are you really going back to Tanzania? Hilonga, Tanzania. So, but I was determined and I said, no, I'm going back. I mean it. So I returned to Tanzania. And today, I think my friends are surprised. They are happy. I see a lot of likes on Facebook and elsewhere about the impact that I'm making now after coming back to Tanzania, back to my people, by making my PhD meaningful. Because otherwise it will be a paper PhD, some more papers. Okay, I already have 30 papers. If all these 30 papers could not solve even one problem in my community, then those papers are useless. Actually, they wanted me to be the member of parliament, but I said, okay, no, maybe I should continue with what I'm doing now. So I'm giving back to my community, and this is now inspiring many young engineers in Africa, and I hope across the world that it pays more to use your education to give back to your community, the community that sacrificed a lot for you, and to whom much is given, much will be required. This is actually from the Bible in the book of Luke. So I want to give back to my community because much is given to me. So I am determined to give much because much is required from me. Having a PhD, I think, is not for a personal pride or for personal benefit. It is a broader sense of giving back to the people, to the larger community, to the nation, to the continent. This is the grand responsibility that I have now. And to use our education, to use our innovation, our engineering endeavor and success to solve the real challenges in our communities.
I mean, it's so inspiring to hear you talk about that and what's kind of driving you there. I just want to just take us back and actually describe what these nanofilters are and how they're being used. So what is your filter and how does it work to deal with some of the problems you've got with water in Africa?
Excellent. So what I did is that I identified the contaminants that are found in water, and I realized that the materials that I was studying in my PhD are able to remove these contaminants. For example, I was studying nanoporous silica. It has active surfaces, and so it can remove contaminants from water, which can be modified in different ways. If you further want to improve this nanoporous silica to target a specific, let's say, a species of contaminant that has a certain functional group that cannot be removed by conventional porous silica, then that is where I modify its surface to develop a specific structure or a functional group that is able to target that specific contaminant that I observe in water.
What you've got here is you've got silica which has got a very high surface area, and you're actually changing the shape of the silica at a nanoscale, so a very small scale, so that it can actually attract these contaminants you're trying to get rid of. So the contaminant fits onto the surface and gets stuck onto the surface of the silica. Is that right?
Man, I talked for 1 hour and then you summarized in 20 seconds. Oh, no, that's the point.
Well, funnily enough, in acoustics, we work with silica and activated carbon for sticking air molecules onto the surface of things. So I know a little bit, but I've never used a filtration.
No.
It's amazing how these sort of bits of engineering cross paths in different ways.
You should get one paper from your explanation.
And so what's the next challenge for you?
The next, for me, is a campaign called Thirst for Life campaign. I got one runner from Canada, a lady by the name of Veronique. Veronique has decided to run a marathon from Alexandria to Cape Town. She was looking for a water filter that she will be establishing all her way from Alexandria to Cape Town. And then she found this nano filter. So she wrote to me, say, Hilonga, I want to run across Africa and I will be establishing filtration points in Africa. Oh no, that was a big surprise to me. And so now we have formed a consortium to scale up nanofilter and to establish 1,000 water stations from Alexandria in Egypt to Cape Town in South Africa. That will impact like 5 million people.
This reminds me of a quote of yours I've seen, which is, I want to be a millionaire, not in terms of money, but in terms of impacting millions of lives.
Yes, indeed. That is why I am determined to be a billionaire in terms of impacting billions of lives. And through this Thirst for Life campaign, I see my dream is coming to a reality, because Africa has a great potential to benefit through this nanofilter. I believe this is my opportunity now to touch billions of lives in Africa and beyond.
There's more on Asqua's story in his book, The Story of a Journey of an African Inventor, from Gongali Village to London and Beyond. Now my final guest is Sian Cleaver, engineer and aspiring astronaut.
So my name's Sian Cleaver, and I'm a spacecraft engineer, currently working for Airbus in Germany, so the space part of Airbus, and I am involved in a really exciting program called the Orion European Service Module program, and for that I'm the industrial manager. And the European Service Module is one part of a bigger program that's led by NASA. Basically, we just have one module sitting behind the crew module, and that's what propels the astronauts into space. And that's where Europe is involved, and that's what I'm involved in do to build this module. But it's not just one. A bit like Apollo, there's going to be a series of these spacecraft. We're going to do a test flight originally, then we're going to take astronauts just to do a loop around the moon. Come on, it's pretty cool. And then eventually, with the third one, we will hopefully be landing astronauts on the moon again, and it will go on from there. So this is really a series of missions that I'm involved with.
Service module is quite an interesting term, I think, because it sort of kind of sounds quite mundane, but actually it's hugely complicated and hugely exciting, isn't it?
Well, yes. Without the European Service Module, we can't get those astronauts to the moon. We need something to propel them there. We need to support them and provide all the life support systems and the power, of course, as well, to get us there. And that's everything that the service module does. So yeah, I guess it's quite a mundane title for something that is actually really super important and really valuable for this whole mission concept, really.
And what does it actually look like? I don't know if you've built it yet, but when it's built, what will it look like?
So yes, we've built the first one. The first module has been shipped to our friends in the US, shipped to NASA, and that should hopefully be launching later this year. So basically, the part that we have built in Europe at Airbus it's like a cylinder. I think it's about 4 meters high cylinder, and it's just packed with I think it's over 20,000 different parts and components inside. So you've got about 12 kilometers of cables in there, and they're all different colors. They're all attached in very specific ways and very specific paths around different equipment. And I just look at that and I just think it's amazing that we've managed to design something like that. Whenever I go into the clean room where we're building this, honestly, it just takes my breath away with how complex it is, but yet how beautiful it is at the same time. And then you've got essentially boxes, avionics boxes that do certain jobs and help to control this spacecraft and provide us with data about it. And then you've also got tanks. So you've got tanks full of water, tanks full of oxygen and nitrogen, and then of course the propellant tanks, which are full with the propellant that we need to get us to the moon. And then on the side of our cylinder, we've got these big collapsible solar panels, and they will deploy when we're in space. There's 4 of those, and they will collect all the sunlight and turn it into the energy that the whole module needs to keep working when it's up in space. So yeah, kind of a big cylinder, and it's the cylinder that sits behind the cone bit where the astronauts ride in. So if you can visualize that a bit from maybe in a picture of an Apollo mission, it's a little bit similar to that. It's the bit behind the cone.
And actually your task is in some form about integration to actually get these different systems to work together?
Yeah, so my specific job on the programme, so I kind of have 2 roles. On the one hand, I am very involved with one specific module, so our second module, and that is in our clean room in Bremen in Germany right now, and we're just finishing building that, and we're just about to move towards the test phase before we send that over to the US. And hand it over to NASA. So on that particular module, I help out with the scheduling. So we do all the assembly, the integration and test of each of the modules in Bremen. And of course, we need to manage that and make sure that it's all done on time. So my job there is to manage a Microsoft project file, actually, that lists every single step that's required to put this thing together and test it. And I keep that up to date, and I make sure that we are going to get it out of the door exactly when the customer, so when the European Space Agency and NASA need it to be out of the door by. So that's one of my roles. My other role is a bit broader. I'm what's called an industrial manager across the whole of the Orion program. So an industrial manager is an interesting term. It means different things in different parts of the space business. But for me, on my program, it basically means that for every single European service module that we build, and we're going to build a few of these, I have to make sure that all of the equipment that we need to integrate onto this spacecraft, I need to make sure that it all comes at the right time, so that we can build it. Of course, so we don't build the whole spacecraft ourselves. We basically buy bits. So we have subcontractors building different parts, and then we put it all together here in Germany. So yeah, my job is making sure that everything comes exactly when it's promised, and that if there's any technical problems, that they're resolved on time, so that nothing is disrupted in this really careful integration sequence that we have. So yeah, those are my 2 jobs. So I'm more on the program management side of things, but I do also get to go into the clean room and see these spacecraft being built, which is really amazing.
And if you were sort of kind of had a chance to engineer something now for future generations to work on, any dreams of what that might be?
Well, I think obviously after we've conquered the moon again, after we've been back to the moon, the plan there from a lot of the major space agencies around the world is to then make the next step and go on to Mars. That really still is the goal. The moon is kind of a stepping stone. If we can get to the moon, develop the technologies to get us to the moon again, and also put in orbit around the moon this gateway system. This is the plan. They want to build like a space station around the moon. And if we can get that infrastructure up and running, if we can perhaps start to use resources on the moon to create energy and to sustain these systems, then we can go from the moon onwards to Mars much easier. And that, for me, really is the next logical step, and something that I hope to see in my lifetime, and certainly the lifetime of the next generation.
And what sort of reaction do you get to the public from this? Because going back to the moon is retreading ground, isn't it? And does it seem, why are we doing this? Haven't we done this before back in the 60s?
Well, I mean, the quick answer that I would always say is, well, yes, but we only sent men then, American men, to the moon. Now it's time for women to go to the moon. It's time for Europeans to go to the moon. It's time for a whole diverse crowd of people to start accessing the moon and open it up to the whole world, really. So that, for me, is really important. But also, I think we need to make this step so that we can go onwards to Mars. It makes it a lot easier if we can have this stepping stone of a lunar base to go on to Mars with. And also the technologies, we develop technologies to go to the moon, then we can further develop those to take us to Mars. And also, of course, remember there's a whole few generations of people who weren't alive at the time of the moon landings. So, I certainly wasn't. So it's going to be inspiring for a whole new cohort of people, really. A large proportion of the world will be seeing this for the first time. And that I hope will inspire young people and do wonders for the world of engineering.
And you personally, would you like to go to space, be the first woman on the moon?
Absolutely. I think amongst my colleagues, most of us are sort of have an inner astronaut really trying to burst out. So yes, absolutely. I've always wanted to be an astronaut. I'll definitely be applying. There's an astronaut call coming up really soon from the European Space Agency. I'll definitely be applying for that. Now,
we asked you for a quote, and you gave one by Ernest Hemingway, that it's good to have an end to journey towards, but it is the journey that matters in the end. I mean, that seems incredibly important for an astronaut.
Well, for me, that quote, I think, is particularly special because I, like many children, I declared I wanted to be an astronaut when I was about 5 years old. It was a childhood dream of mine. And I was fortunate enough that the people around me have always said, oh yeah, go for it. You can do it. But actually, I realised over the years that, okay, put that aside, it's statistically very difficult to become an astronaut. Your chances are quite small, just statistically. But even with that aside, because I've had that end goal, it's kind of shaped my whole career. Because I always wanted to be an astronaut, I chose to do certain subjects for GCSEs and for A-levels. I was interested in certain hobbies because I was interested in space. And then I went on to start working for Airbus, on these exciting science and exploration missions. And then I moved into human spaceflight. And it's all because I have that end goal in the back of my mind. So whether I achieve that or not, I don't mind so much because it's really allowed me to carve out a really, really interesting career. And I feel really lucky that I am doing the things that I'm doing purely because of a decision I made back when I was about 5 years old. So yeah, that's why that quote is special for me. I think even if you want to be, I don't know, the Prime Minister or a professional footballer or any of these things that are really, your chances are statistically quite small, you should hang on to that, because even if you don't make it, then you're going to have a really interesting journey on your quest to becoming whatever it is that you want to become.
If I could grant you, if I had a magic wand to grant you a superpower, what would you like?
I'd like the ability to be able to assimilate information better, to take on board everything. I think it's frustrating, isn't it, being a human, that our memories have limited capacity sometimes and that we can't always retain everything. So I'd love to be able to do that, a bit like in that film Limitless, where all of a sudden he can absorb all the information around him and then process it all in his mind. I think if you could do that as someone working in STEM, then you'd be super powerful. You'd be able to build something really awesome, I think, if you had that power.
I don't know the film Limitless. Presumably there was some downside at some point, because that's normally what happens in these kind of movies.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I don't remember it so well, but I can't remember exactly what happens in the film. But there's definitely a negative connotation to it, particularly from the fact that he takes some synthetic substance in order to have this ability. So yes, it's not all roses in that film for sure. There would definitely be downsides, and I mean sometimes the power to forget is an important part of being human as well.
Well, I could imagine in the meetings where you're meant to have done something, you can't pretend you've forgotten. That would be quite embarrassing.
That too, yeah. At least you can make a little excuse for yourself these days. Oh, sorry, I completely forgot, you know. But you're right. You wouldn't have that excuse if people knew about your superpower. Okay, maybe I'll switch it to just being able to fly then. That'll just be fun and hopefully with nothing bad coming of it.
Thanks for listening. Now, if like Sian you need to assimilate that information all over again, then please go to www.inventivepodcast.com and subscribe. There you'll find the full interviews, you'll find all those wonderful stories our fiction writers have created, inspired by the brilliant and diverse engineers. Goodbye.